Everyone. Thank you. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Juliya Borie. I am a librarian and instructor at the University of Toronto, and I chair NASIC's Mentoring and Student Outreach Committee. And I'm so fortunate to welcome colleagues who are part of this panel to share their career paths and discuss best practices for applying and interviewing for library jobs. So we're going to have our panelists answer questions, and feel free to post your questions in Q&A as well, and we'll do our best to answer them. If we run out of time for all the questions, we will provide follow-up post session, so don't worry if we run out of time. The recording and resources will be shared after the session as well. So let's get started. I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us about their careers. And I will ask Betsy Appleton to begin.
Hi, everybody. Again, thank you, Julia. My name is Betsy Appleton. I am currently the Associate Director for Technical Services at Tarleton Law Library at the University of Texas. And my career path has been really linear. I went straight from undergrad to grad school at UNC, and then got my first job right out of grad school as a serials librarian at a large academic medical library. I then, my next job was as an electronic resources librarian at a large public university library. And then I moved on to another electronic resources role in a small private liberal arts undergraduate academic library, which is same title, very different jobs. And in 2017, I started here at Tarleton as head of collection development, and I was promoted in the fall of 2020 to my current role when my predecessor left. I've been on or participated in search committees in every library I've worked in, and except for that first job right out of grad school, I've chaired at least one search in every role. Some things to take away from my career path. I had no geographic limitations early career, which was an extremely fortunate boat to be in. My first job, the hook that kind of got me in the door, was some experiences that I had in my graduate research assistantships in grad school. I kind of screwed up in reverse. I was really good at print journal shifts and weeding. And I kept hired to do more, getting hired from subsequent roles in grad school to do more of that kind of same work. And I didn't think this was a great experience because it was mostly schlepping heavy-bound journals, but in retrospect, it really laid a good foundation for how serials work, and it was enough for me to learn on the job, and learning on one job has led to my next job every step of the way. I've jumped from relatively different types of libraries by having some niche serials and e-resources expertise, but many of my colleagues at my current library have kind of done the opposite. They translate law library experience in one area of librarianship to another within law libraries.
Hi, I'm Wendy Robertson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Institutional Repository and Metadata Librarian at the University of Iowa. I started at Iowa as a library assistant, got my degree going to school part-time, and eventually became our first electronic resources technical services librarian after a national search. This was at an era when we did not reclassify library assistants to a librarian. Staying at the same institution made this transition quite slow, but I now have deep knowledge of how things have changed at Iowa and why. I've transitioned from serials cataloging to e-resources, to IT primarily supporting e-resources, local digital content with a focus on RIR and local journals, and later to some digital humanities work. I'm now back in the cataloging metadata digitization department where I can focus on more metadata issues. I've enjoyed the various challenges in my job here, and I've not needed to move to get new challenges. Of particular relevance to this discussion, I'm not a department head, do not supervise librarians, and have never led a job search. I have participated in searches in various capacities over the last 20 years.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Dawn, would you mind going next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dawn Raposa. I am a librarian in the U.S. Serials and Government Documents section at the Library of Congress with responsibilities for acquisitions, cataloging, e-resources management, and licensing. My career path has taken a bit of a curvy road. My bachelor's and first master's degrees are in music. And shortly after graduating from those degree programs, I decided I did not want to be isolated in a practice room for 8 hours a day, nor did I want to be working late evenings and weekends after a full day of teaching. So rather, a circuitous route took me to library science because I do enjoy helping people and teaching. Seemed like a good compromise, and in over 20 years, I have never regretted my decision. I've taken sort of a back and forth course between public services and technical services, working as a librarian in public services and technical services, as well as management and administration at public, academic, special, and now federal library. My most rewarding experiences in my career are those in which I have really connected with the community that I worked in and the impact that I've made on that community, whether large or small. What I've loved most about the field of librarianship are the numerous opportunities to explore many paths and perhaps revisit some of those paths along the course of a career. If you find a path that you love early on in your career, that's great. But if you want to shift gears and explore other areas of the profession, you can do that too, without having to change careers.
And Matt.
Hi, I'm Matt Jabaily. I'm the Electronic Resources and Serials Librarian at the University of Colorado Springs, he, him pronouns. I had my background in English. My bachelor's degree is there, and I thought I was going to be like a secondary education teacher, and that didn't quite go anywhere. I was in Madison, Wisconsin with my wife who was getting a PhD, and I decided I wanted to get another degree, and it was either law or librarianship, and I flipped a coin and became a librarian, more or less. So I didn't really know what I was doing. By the time I got through my education, I knew I wanted to be an academic librarian, but I also knew that my wife was going to be a professor and be moving whenever she needed to for her career. So my goal was just to be well qualified for as many positions as possible so I could get the first job posted in the city that I lived in. So I've held jobs in all kinds of things for that reason. I've been in reference and instruction. I was a systems librarian. I was in general information services, which had a lot more of an IT component in it. And now I'm doing electronic resources and moving more and more into the collection side of electronic resources. I'm currently in a tenure track role, so I do some research also that are requirements for my job, and if there's questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. I've been at 5 different institutions now, and I've been on a search committee or search chair at each of them, and they're all a little bit different. So I have a wide range of experience in that way too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those lovely introductions. So our first question is, what should I look for when looking at job ads, and what is some job ad jargon that we should look out for?
So yes, I think, yeah, I'm up first for this one. If you want to advance the
Betsy.
slide, because we recently rewrote for a metadata librarian position that's entry level, as well as a senior metadata librarian position. And I've bolded some tells for the terms that you should be looking for in these examples. So in the first paragraph, you see the words participation or participates in and advises and assists. Something you can tell from that is that in this person's not expected to lead this work. That would be kind of a tell for an entry-level position. There's also in the responsibilities, you see that the responsibilities are in collaboration with the senior metadata librarian. So this can be an indication of where a position sits hierarchically, which is obviously going to tell you more in a larger organization, and it's less indicative or useful in a smaller one. In the required qualifications, you see, that the degree is required. But something you don't see there is experience. That's missing. And I do want to note that sometimes 1 year of experience can be on a required qualifications list for entry-level positions. Don't discount work in non-MLIS requiring positions, or if you have any part-time work experience during grad school, things like that. Yeah, and that familiarity with and knowledge of kinds of terms that are in here. It really surprised me early on how low a bar familiarity with or knowledge of really means. The translation for that is basically, we're going to train you how to use these things. Like in this example, Mark 21 format, RDA, LCSH, etc. But we really want you to know what they are and generally why we would be using them. In the preferred qualifications, if you have any preferred qualifications for a job description, definitely highlight those because that's a big bonus. To translate that, preferred qualifications, it's basically if you have any of these experience, skills, knowledge, etc., you're going to get up to speed faster in this position. And then if we move on to the senior level position, I've bolded all the differences between the descriptions in purple. Most of them are semantics and things like that, but there are some that are more indicative that this is a senior position. So you notice that all of that participation and assisting language is gone, and leading has taken the place of that, and that's an indication that this is a more senior position. Supervisory experience. And the fact that this is a supervisory role can indicate that this is not entry level, though that's not necessarily so depending on the organization. But generally in a larger organization, that's going to be a tell. That expert knowledge and proficiency or experience with sorts of language, again, to translate that, that's going to say that you're not going to get any training in this outside any specific local quirks, and we want you to do that work well from day one. You also see in the required qualifications that there's a minimum 5 years professional cataloging experience here. I don't really think 5 years was the right thing on that, candidly. I'd have said 3, but I'm leaving it as is because that's what you would have seen when this position was posted. And so that's definitely going to indicate that this is not entry level. So I think, yeah, that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much. So we have a number of examples of postings that are included in the slides. We won't cover each one of those, but you're welcome to take a look at the language that may be useful for your application. Wendy, you had some suggestions about what to include.
I think actually we might be at Dawn on slides right now.
Yeah, I didn't make any notes, and I'm not going to take long to go through 3 job ads, I promise. What the 3 examples that I have here are a technician, a supervisory technician, and a librarian, and I chose those to show sort of a logical career progression that a new graduate might take entering entering into a federal library. A lot of librarians that work at the Library of Congress choose to apply for and accept positions as library technicians, really just to get their foot in the door. And a lot of what technicians do at the Library of Congress are stepping stones to a librarian position. And over the course of the time that one might spend in that technician position, they might start to be trained in librarian responsibilities. And that is very deliberate and intentional as a part of enabling people to want to stay at the Library of Congress and fulfill their careers there. Then someone might move on to supervisory technician position. Logical progression of responsibilities, pretty similar to what Betsy was showing. with the non-supervisory responsibilities progressing to supervisory. And then Julia has up the librarian position example. Thank you. One point that I want to point out here, I think there is a second slide for the librarian job example. Yeah, so between these two slides, sorry, if you could go back one, Julia, it's actually there. If you take a look at, advance to the librarian example.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. And one more, I think. There we go, thank you. You notice in the requirements, there's no mention of a master's degree in library science or information science. And at the Library of Congress and other federal organizations, that is the case where master's degree is not necessarily required because of the career path that I described from technician on up. And I have several colleagues who did follow that career progression at the library. In fact, I was recently on an interview panel, and although we did interview several candidates that did have master's degrees, one of the offers that we extended was to an applicant who did not have a master's degree because their experience was very relevant to the position, and that person was obviously taking the steps to progress, take a career progression that related quite well to the job that we were hiring for. So if you're at all interested in applying for federal jobs, the master's degree may or may not be required for a librarian position.
Well, that's great to know. I didn't realize that. Thank you. Thank you, Dawn. Okay. Wendy, you had some.
Yeah, I have a lot of smaller points. This Betsy largely covered, which has to do with pay attention to how experience is described. And so if it doesn't specify professional library experience, then your library assistant or your student work doing cataloging or something else can count. But if it actually says professional library experience, then you really do need that. So so this was not an entry-level position. It's and then again showing experience with things as opposed to knowledge of. Next. This is a phrase we will use in job ads, which is kind of what started some of this whole discussion of doing this webinar: bibliographic knowledge of one or more languages in addition to English. And I think Julia and I were talking and realized this is not a very, it makes sense to us, but not necessarily to people outside of our field. So this doesn't mean you can translate a book without a dictionary or online translation, and it definitely doesn't mean you can speak the language fluently. So it's for a few years of language classes will likely qualify you for bibliographic knowledge. There may be positions that require more extensive knowledge. So be clear about what your knowledge is. Don't hesitate to mention that you had 2 years of French in college, even that it wasn't the most recent, that still is experience. So do include that in your cover letter or in CV. Next.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is another one that I've realized, this may not be universal terminology, but when we say electronic resources, we mean licensed or free electronic resources generally produced elsewhere. So e-journals, e-books, streaming, and databases. And when we say digital, we mean digitized materials or born digital materials generally from our own collections, especially special collections. And also when we say metadata, we are referring to non-marked cataloging and therefore digitized collections. So that may not be universal, but it's definitely how things can get parsed. And so be careful of what these words mean or what you think it might mean for that library, and perhaps looking at the website might give you a bit more information. Next. And so this is just a list of desired qualifications. And as Betsy said, they are just, we hope you have something here, although you might see something like strongly preferred. So we really want that, but that still doesn't mean that you have to have it. Yeah, and then this is salary range. So if there's a salary range listed, don't expect to be able to negotiate for more than is listed. For us, I don't think it's possible. You can't do it. So it might be a very firm top. And if there's no salary range listed, hopefully you did not see the job posted on the NASIG jobs blog. And you also might see a starting point, and then it would be commensurate with experience. And then next, Julia. Sometimes jobs are listed as kind of 2 levels. We sometimes will do it as this level or that level. I'd never seen one at 4 possible ranks until I saw this recently. Thought, wow, okay, that's but that means you can apply, and you might need to specify, are you applying at the librarian 1 level, or are you applying at the librarian 4 level, or the library may determine that based on your expertise. And next. You may also see some fairly standard job duties in a job ad, and you really wouldn't know these are across many jobs unless you are really looking at that institution. It doesn't mean these aren't important, and in some cases can really point out what is important to the university. And you can expect to see, you can kind of get a sense of what librarians do at that institution. And so in this case, this actively supports the library's commitment to diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion in the workplace, as an example.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. Yes, so I could definitely relate to the bibliographic knowledge of a language terminology, because it appeared on a post that I applied for. I have always been passionate about languages, and growing up in Ukraine, I was studying a bunch of languages, including Greek, in addition to Slavic languages. So, and the aptitude was very useful in working with multilingual collections. So if you have language proficiency, make sure to include it, and also indicate what is your level of proficiency. If languages are important from equity, diversity, and inclusion standpoint, and as libraries uphold principles of EDI and in support of diverse user communities, it is important to also look at the statements that may be part of the job postings. And Matt, you had some advice regarding this.
Sure. So typically you will see a required CV or resume and cover letter, and those are both pretty standard. More and more, I think there are other statements that are included. EDI statements are often one of those, and a commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion is more of a either requirement or desirable thing than it certainly was 13 years ago when I started my library career, when nobody was really talking about this. And so it is important to kind of pay attention to how the institution, the library, talks about equity, diversity, and inclusion, what terms they use. Sometimes accessibility will be in there as well. And so that's another thing to think about. It's kind of beyond the scope of this session to really talk about how to write one of these statements if it is required. But just basically, I would say to try to focus on your experiences, as personal and professional. If you aren't doing any work in equity, diversity, and inclusion right now, you can always start, which is a good idea, or to talk about interest. It's helpful, especially if you're at an institution that's requiring one of these statements. Take a look at their website and see what kind of programs they're doing, what kind of initiatives they're doing. And you can always express an interest, even if you don't feel very comfortable with your experiences. I think it's just important to have something to express an openness, and to really be open-minded and interested in pursuing things in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it's important, we'll get to it a little later when we talk about interviews and that kind of thing, but be prepared to talk about this and to see the links between your work, the work of librarians generally, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. And if you haven't thought about it, start thinking about it now.
Great, thank you so much. So our next question is, what should I include in my application and how will libraries evaluate my application? Betsy, would you like to?
All right. Yes. Yeah, I can start here. So look really carefully at the required and preferred qualifications and address as many as you possibly can in your application materials. And why? Well, when I chair search committees, I develop a rubric to evaluate applications. And the more you can show on your application materials, the better. So here's the example I provided of a type of rubric. This was for systems librarian. I think a few things that this does is for the committee, it can address some inherent biases. You have to score things based on what you see in the materials. Occasionally, committee members are going to see things differently, and those numbers provide a really nice jumping off point for a discussion. Like I might say, oh, I rated name one a 5 for ILS system administration experience, but you said 2. What did you pick up on? What did I miss? Things like that. And you can also see that not every qualification is well addressed in application materials. For example, that organizational, time management, analytical skills, those so-called soft skills, we're going to look for more evidence of that in an interview or in your references than in a resume or a letter of application, things like that.
Great. Wendy, you wanted to share.
Yeah,
your
so
rubric.
we also use a rubric, and this is given to us by our HR, so it's not even optional that we need to use this. And so for each statement in the job ad, as Betsy had, it's listed, and we need to mark if they meet the required qualifications or the desired. And if you don't meet all the required qualifications, we cannot consider you. There are some things which can be a bit unsure. You can use your cover letter and CV to assess written communication skills, but oral communication will remain unsure. If there are other things that seem unsure to us, then our HR might contact you to ask for more information. So if you receive such a request, this in part means we are interested in you, interested enough to seek more information, but also what you wrote wasn't clear to us. So please think about your reply. Don't just rehash what you already gave to us, because it means it's not answering our questions, and we're giving you the opportunity to expand on your information.
Perfect. Matt, you had some points about this? No?
Sure. So yeah, I agree with much of what's been said. I think something that I often do is just imagine what the evaluator is going to be looking at. So these type of rubrics have been at most, if not all, of the libraries that I've worked at. And so if I am applying for a job right now, I almost like imagine that process of filling out that rubric, and I go through and fill it out on my own application materials. You want to make it really easy for them to check off all the things. And so they won't necessarily be hitting Control F on their computers and looking for certain words, but they might. So I do try to include as close to possible as possible the language that they used, just to make it really easy for them to get through that first stage. And then after that first stage of like, I am qualified, then how can I kind of make myself sound interesting or likable or memorable? The reviewers are sifting through a ton of applications in many of the cases, especially for entry-level positions. And so I try to have something about myself so that I'll be memorable. Usually it's only like 1 or 2 things that I really will remember about a candidate when I am doing that first pass through things. So anything you can do to stand out, as long as it's positive enough that you don't mind being, oh, that's that person who had this experience. Yeah.
Great. And Dawn, any advice?
Sure. While you don't want to create a 10-page resume, don't discount any accomplishments as small. Make sure you include experiences from school, work, or volunteer experience that might not exactly match the job announcement exactly, but demonstrate some of the soft skills that others have been talking about interpersonal, relationship building, time management, team player, team builder, all are components that are required in most jobs. So don't be afraid to list those accomplishments. If you're applying for an academic library position where presenting and publishing experience are often highly valued, include those on your resume, even if they're not related to library work. This demonstrates your skill and experience with writing and presenting and gives the panel an opportunity to ask you questions about this experience. I recently reviewed my mentee's resume with her. She has really great experience in publishing and presenting that do not relate to library work, but that would catch my attention if I was on a hiring panel looking at her resume. The Library of Congress does use a weighted rating scale, much like the one that it's very similar to the one that Betsy showed, developed by the Human Capital Director at the library. After the panel applies their ratings, then HCD does some other math. We don't actually advance a candidate for recommendation for selection until all three of the panelists agree on the rating. So that's a little bit different, but similar processes. And I didn't get permission to share that, so that's why you're not seeing it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this information and sort of like lifting the mystery behind how we look at applications from the other end. Okay, our next question is, how do I find and prepare references?
So yeah, to start out, this is one of my absolute favorite parts of being a hiring manager or chairing searches. I love calling references, which sounds kind of weird because who wants to like cold call somebody? But honestly, these are awesome conversations. They're really lovely most of the time, just to talk about how great somebody is. I do want candid feedback about how a candidate works with others and their general work habits. But what you really want as a candidate is references that are going to talk about how awesome you are. Some ways to prep your references: ensure they have a copy of your resume or your Vita. When you make the ask for somebody to be a reference, make sure they have some context for the type of position you're applying for. If it makes any sense in that situation, remind them of and express some gratitude for that big project or opportunity or the work that you did with them. That was a great jumping off point for this next step in your career. When you list references, provide a bit of context. So for example, now when I give references, I usually have a supervisor, a colleague, and then also somebody I supervised as references. And then I just briefly identify who's who on those reference lists. At least one reference should be a supervisor, if at all possible. And I realize, and especially hiring managers that are hiring for entry-level positions, for the most part, realize this can be difficult early on, especially if there's a good reason you don't want your current or only library supervisor to be notified that you are job searching. But if you had an internship, if you worked in retail, any type of that kind of work, that's going to work for a reference in this case. If a supervisor from that experience can speak about what it is like to work with you, you've got a reference.
Great. Thank you so much. Matt, did you have some thoughts?
So I think thinking about early on about who you want your references to be is important. I remember in library school, I would often even like pursue certain things because I'd say like, oh, that's an internship where I could get a really good reference and someone to actually know who I am and the work I'm capable of. So I think that's really important. And then just make sure to have people who will speak of you positively and favorably, and really completely positively and favorably. So you may even want to explicitly ask them whether they're comfortable giving you a favorable reference, especially, and let them give you a chance to express any concerns that they might have or reservations. That way they can kind of get it out with you rather than being asked about it unprepared in a situation. We had a recent case where a candidate was our preferred candidate, but their supervisor said a few things about their professionalism that were a little bit weird. And so we did end up hiring the person and have been very happy with them, but it was just a case where you don't want to get as far as the references and then throw some doubt into the minds of the people. And I think it's the kind of thing that may not even be intentional on the person's part, but you just really want to know them and know what kind of reference ahead of time. Some advice that I usually give to the people who are acting as references is to like be aware of their biases too, especially if there's kind of generational or racial, gender, ability backgrounds that they might not, that you might not be aware of when you give a reference, and to kind of interrogate those before you act as a reference. You'll also kind of want to think about that when choosing your references too, and just making sure that you have a good idea about what they'll say about you and what you want them to say.
Great. What kind of research should I do before applying, and what kind of research should I do before the interview?
So before I apply, I don't do a lot of homework before I apply. I really focus on what the job ad communicates. I'll skim through the organization's website, but I'm not going to sink a lot of time into learning about an organization unless I'm invited to a first round, which is usually a phone interview. And for that first round phone interview, kind of a screening sort of interview, I'm going to study the website then. I'm going to try to learn as much as I possibly can about the organization and ideally the department that the job is based in, based on what they communicate externally. And that should raise some questions that you want answered based on that. And also a good hiring committee is going to expect questions from candidates in every round of interviews, so be ready for that. In that second round or in-person longer interview, for the type of research I'd be doing, I'd be leaning on my network. Do I know anyone who used to work in that organization? Do I have a colleague of a colleague who could share some information about the organization? Can I chat with anyone who used to work with the library director or the hiring manager or the supervisor of the position? And if they can provide any context about the environment, because that's going to provide some more fodder for questions you want answered.
Okay. Wendy, what's your take on this?
So I fully agree with everything Betsy said, and just sort of a reminder to don't send out a cookie cutter application letter, because we can tell when you're just generically applying to library jobs, and that's really not going to impress anybody. So do enough homework to read the job ad really carefully and cover what this job is specifically, so you can find all that information as was pointed out previously. So at the point of the interview, review the terms used in the description so you aren't inadvertently flustered when they ask you about something, especially using a variant term. And we tend to speak in too much jargon, and we might use outdated term or local terminology on accident, or we might use very new terminology. We might say metadata description set instead of a record. So always feel free to ask for clarification if the term we use is unfamiliar.
I think I'm next, so I would say it depends a lot on your strategy overall. I've always been in positions where I've had to get the first job or two that's posted, and so I've usually done a little bit more of that prep work and really getting to know the library, looking up some of the people who might be on it. I don't know if it makes any difference because it's mostly about you at that first phase and not about them, but I do try to have a sense of who's going to be reading my cover letter and tailor it towards them if at all possible. If you're doing a wider search though and applying to places a lot, I think it's fine to focus more on the jobs that you want rather than the library's individual information.
Great. And Dawn, did you have some experience to share?
Yeah, I have a personal anecdote, a little bit different way of thinking about things, kind of a lessons learned on what does not work for me, especially for federal jobs. I've actually tried to anticipate what questions might be asked based on knowledge, skills, and abilities in federal world, otherwise known as KSAs, which form the basis of the job announcement and the job interview. So I have found myself filling my head with memorized answers to questions that I have no idea if they're going to be asked. I think this is the musician in me trying to prepare for an orchestra audition, and it has never worked to my advantage. Instead, ask someone who will give honest but kind feedback to do mock interviews with you. Know your resume inside and out. Physically take a highlighter and mark accomplishments you would like the panel to know about if they relate to the job in some way, whether it's directly or indirectly. My experience has been that a panel will not mind if you have some handwritten notes to which you can refer during the interview, nor will they mind if you actually take notes so that you can formulate a response that answers all parts of the question.
Okay, what about if I have experience outside of libraries? Is there a way to leverage that?
Oh, there's definitely ways to leverage that, especially have you done any customer service? Have you done tech support? Have you worked in education? There's so many direct links to so much of librarianship in those areas. But even a little further afield, you can find a lot of experience really can be leveraged. One of my favorite ever colleagues was a manager at a McDonald's prior to her library career. And she used that experience to an enormous advantage in her interview. Her approach to troubleshooting, her examples of conflict resolution, the types of issues that she had and had to figure out for scheduling, for coverage, dealing with the public. She had so many incredible examples that really drove home that she was the right candidate for that position.
Amazing. Wendy.
So it's just as Betsy was saying, so in addition to supervision, an outside job might give you experience in a fast-paced environment or give you strong customer focus. And you can use phrases like that to describe it. And depending on what the job is that you're applying for, you might be able to use your knowledge from being a graduate student to good effect because you've used the library, you've used the resources, you've used the discovery layers, you know how all that works from the user side, which is really important if you're going to be supporting it on the back end. So you may not have managed a link resolver, but you've used this. And so demonstrating that you have an understanding of how it's used can be really useful in securing a job where you're going to be managing it.
Perfect. Dawn?
There's another personal story, a lot like Betsy's McDonald's story. Unbeknownst to her, my stepdaughter was inconspicuously being interviewed for an office manager job by one of her customers when she worked at Lowe's. And her customer then, now boss, identified traits in her that he liked for filling his office manager position that had nothing to do with the work she was visibly doing at Lowe's. She still works in that position and is now working on an MBA. So again, you can absolutely leverage non-library experiences to your advantage.
Yeah, I agree too. I think including those non-library experiences can give you an opportunity to show evaluators who you are and kind of differentiate yourself too, which I think is really good. You don't really want to reduce yourself to a single hobby or interest, which I have seen in a few applications, but it's good. It's good to see candidates who are passionate about things and who care about their communities. And so including that other type of information can really fill out the story behind you.
Thank you for all your insights. The interview, so we finally, the application was accepted and we heard about an interview. What can we expect and how might the interview be different depending on the kind of library? Dawn, would you mind shedding some light on LC practices?
Oh, thank you for applying for this position at the Library of Congress, and welcome to the interview. This will be a structured interview model. And as I mentioned, all job announcements and interviews at the Library of Congress are based on the knowledge, skills, and abilities from the job announcement. And the interview questions will be those that the panelists identified as critical competencies for the job. For example, describe your experience with developing relationships inside and outside of an organization. Describe a situation related to this experience, the action you took, and the results, etc., etc. Some federal agencies are moving to more of a behavioral interview questions like academic and public library interviews. For example, have you ever managed a difficult contract problem? How did you handle it? And what were the outcomes of your actions? Don't assume that the panel has memorized your resume. They have likely reviewed many resumes, will be conducting numerous interviews, and have multiple responsibilities competing for brain power. If you interview for a federal job, you might feel like you are reciting details from your resume. And don't let yourself get distracted by trying to read panelists' body language. Panelists who seem disinterested might just be introverts trying to stay focused and or impartial, or taking copious mental notes.
Great. Matt, what about academic libraries?
Yeah, so the process for academic libraries can be pretty exhausting. Usually there's a first round. For most of my libraries, it's been maybe 10 people will do the first round interviews. Sometimes it's less. I thought Betsy gets surprised. Sometimes it's more. Eventually, we'll narrow it down to 2 to 4 for in-person. But the first round will be on Zoom usually, or it used to be on a phone call, but those days are pretty much over. Though some of my colleagues prefer to do non-video ones for bias reasons. But so usually that first one will be scripted questions. Usually each person will ask you a single question and it's the same at all the things. For in-person interviews, it can be a really, really long day, or at some of the institutions that I've done, it's 2 days of interviews. At my most recent one, the interview experience included giving a prepared talk, which was 20 minutes, followed by a question and answer, a meet and greet with everyone at the library, an interview with the search committee that was very similar to the phone interview, a meeting with the department, a meeting with all the library faculty, which had questions about research service and tenure and promotion requirements, a one-on-one with the dean, a hangout with the equity, diversity, and inclusion team, a meeting about HR and benefits, a tour of the library, a tour of the campus, and 2 meals with various constituents from the library or other positions. And so it can be a really long time. At each of these stages, candidates were also asked if they had any questions. And even if you prepared a list of questions, those can run out relatively quickly. So I would say have some questions prepared, and then to think of your conversations as more just like an opportunity to talk about something. And so having a few like conversation starters about people's experiences and asking them questions about their own work can be a really easy way to give your interviewers something to talk about to fill that time.
Betsy, did you have anything to?
Yes, yeah, just to extend on Matt's answer a bit, because all of that is spot on. And there are some things that you should ask for, even if they aren't offered. And I would say if some of these aren't offered, consider what that might indicate regarding the organization. You want some time to check the tech or the setup for any presentation component of an interview. We did dress rehearsals for remote second round video interviews when we were hiring during COVID surges in 2021. And it was a great idea because candidates could resolve those minor tech issues before they were really on in that interview situation. If you need a break, definitely there should be a couple scheduled as needed, but don't feel shy to ask for a moment. If you need to use the restroom, get some water, do something like that. If a committee or the hiring folks don't ask or provide it for you, you should ask for a timeline or a summary of next steps. And then whatever they tell you, mentally add 2 weeks to every step. And whatever you do, don't contact the hiring manager or organization unless you have new information that would be good for them to know. For example, if you're withdrawing from a search because you accepted another offer, or if you have an offer in hand, but you would be interested in entertaining an offer from them instead, et cetera, like that, but you have a decision deadline that they might want to know about, that's the kind of things that you should contact them about. The one exception to this is sending a thank you note for an interview shortly after. Which is not required. It's totally optional, but it is a really nice opportunity to get kind of that last word and leave a good impression. Some things that I'm going to expect I'll need to prepare for an interview. I need to make kind of a list of examples, kind of what Dawn said earlier, but it actually works for me a little bit. I try to think through or recall 3 to 5 big projects or situations where I've successfully navigated a healthy conflict or multiple approaches to a decision, and try to think of them from the past few years. It might be good to review some notes from those situations or somehow reflect on those projects so that it's less likely that when you're asked a question, that tell me about a time when question, everything flies out of your head except for that one thing that you've used in every single example. I've been there. I've also witnessed this, and it is so painful and frustrating when you think of, like, almost immediately after the interview is over, all of the better and more obvious examples after the fact. And again, like Matt said, have a list of questions. One thing I do, I have 2 questions that I ask absolutely everyone that I'm meeting with. And I've done this for the past few successful job searches that I've been the interviewee for. And those 2 questions are, what is your favorite thing about working in this organization? And on the converse, if you could instantly and magically change one thing about the organization, what would it be? And those answers are always really instructive, no matter what they are.
Great. And Wendy, you had
Yeah,
a resource you wanted to share.
So hopefully this never comes up, but there are questions we should not ask you. So I think there'll be a link going in the chat as an example. We should not be asking you any personal questions that have no bearing on the job. And so if you are asked these questions, it's possible it's one person who's made a mistake, but depending on who's asking it or how, what the context is, view it as a red flag for that organization. And then I also want to note that the whole hiring process may take a very long time, and so you need to be patient, and you should hear something yes, no, eventually, but don't expect a quick turnaround.
Great. Well, we have a few minutes left, so we wanted to open it for questions. Are there any questions from our participants?
And I just want to we've got a list of links that we're going to share with everybody post webinar along with the recording. Wendy's list of illegal questions will be shared with you after along with the recording.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Beth. I can't see like Q&A maybe in the presenter mode.
Should we go on to the next question? The general advice, or?
Sure, yeah, and think about questions that you would like our panelists to answer. So yes, we have one more question. What general advice do you have for job seekers?
Okay, do I start this one?
Yes, Betsy,
okay.
Please.
Okay, so yeah, so my answer to this, find somebody experienced in the sort of work you're seeking and have them look over your application materials. I had a mentor in grad school who entirely overhauled my cover letters. And it was so eye-opening and so helpful to see the kinds of things that she wanted me to highlight and the kinds of language. I sounded way too formal in my first few cover letters, but it was really helpful to have her look through that. And also maybe just for those of us out there who become a little oblivious to typos after a third reread, you want to find somebody who can't help but notice those details and have them take a look at all of your application documents. The number of punctuation inconsistencies and typos on my CV that my sister found when she took a look at it for me after I had made a pretty big revision, it was honestly horrifying. I was very embarrassed, and no wonder I was not doing a lot. I was not getting a lot of success with the CV I had at that point. And finally, you really take care of yourself through this process. It can be long. It can be full of extremely weird and capricious rejection, and it doesn't matter how awesome you are. Probably there's going to be a little bit of rejection in this, so do take care of yourself.
That's very sound advice. Thank you so much. We do have one question. Thank you for the wonderful advice. If a job ad does not require a master's degree in LIS, should we not be applying to those?
No, I think the librarian examples at the Library of Congress are a perfect example. Several candidates that I've interviewed actually have very applicable library experience. Regardless of whether or not you have the degree, if you are truly at the entry level, the salary will be the same. It could be slightly negotiable, but the degree, if it's for Library of Congress jobs anyway, if the requirement isn't there, it's not a red flag at all.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We have, feel free to add additional questions. We have some resources that we would like to share, and also for one-on-one help. There are several resources that support learning for LIS students. We have a student mentoring program that matches experienced professionals across North America with LIS students. So check it out. This will be one of the resources that will be available. We also provide opportunities to participate in NACE conference, which is coming up on May 25th to 23rd to 25th in Pittsburgh this year. And we have student spotlight sessions. So take a look at those. We've extended the deadline until next week. And then finally, NACIC has core competencies lists that can be very helpful for looking at the language again that you can use in applications, and that can function as a guideposts to help you assess your skills and see what areas you might want to grow in. So those are the resources we would like to suggest, and we are at time, so I just wanted to thank so much to our wonderful panelists and to participants for participating in today's webinar. And thank you very much.
Thank you all, and
Thank you,
I
Julia.
put it in the notes, but if you have one-on-one questions that didn't get answered, feel free to contact me or some of the other members. We're all happy to talk, or I'm at least happy to talk to people one-on-one, and it's considered part of my job to encourage others to.
Great, thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah,
yes, and you can.
And we'll send out all this contact information too, along with the follow-up. So don't feel like you got to write down somebody's contact information. We'll get it out. We'll get it in your email box for you.
Yes. All right, and do look out for the mentoring program and other opportunities that are available to students and early professionals. So thank you so much.